They were so pale. Some of us believed they were messengers of the gods. Our enemies had become their allies.
What if everything you thought you knew about the mighty Aztec Empire was completely wrong? Scientists have just cracked open the genetic vault of one of history's most mysterious civilizations, and what they found inside has left archaeologists speechless. We're talking about DNA evidence so shocking that it's forcing experts to completely rewrite the history books. From vanished populations to genetic mysteries buried for over 500 years, today we're diving deep into the jaw-dropping discoveries that reveal the Aztecs' true identity. And trust me, the truth is far more complex and darker than anyone imagined. So grab your favorite snack, hit that subscribe button, and let's uncover secrets that have been hidden in our genes for centuries. The genetic time machine. You're an archaeologist digging through the ruins of an ancient Aztec city. You've found pottery, jewelry, maybe even some golden artifacts. But none of these treasures can tell you the whole story like a tiny fragment of bone can. That's exactly what happened when scientists got their hands on ancient DNA samples from Aztec sites across Mexico. For decades, historians have been scratching their heads about the true origins of the Aztec people. The traditional story goes something like this. A nomadic tribe called the Mexica wandered south from a mythical homeland called Aztlan, eventually settling in the Valley of Mexico around 1300 CE. They built their magnificent capital, Tenochtitlan, on an island in Lake Texcoco, and went on to create one of the most powerful empires in the Americas. But here's where things get interesting. When modern geneticists started analyzing DNA from ancient Aztec remains, they didn't find what they expected. Instead of a simple story of migration and empire building, they uncovered evidence of something much more complex and, frankly, much more disturbing. The breakthrough came when researchers managed to extract mitochondrial DNA from bones found in Tlatelolco, the twin city of Tenochtitlan. Mitochondrial DNA is like a genetic passport that gets passed down through the maternal line, giving us incredible insights into ancient population movements and relationships. What they discovered was mind-blowing. The genetic signatures didn't match the neat, tidy origin story that had been taught in textbooks for generations. Instead, they revealed a web of population movements, conquests, and what can only be described as genetic replacement on a massive scale. But this was just the beginning. As more DNA samples were analyzed from sites across central Mexico, a pattern began to emerge that would challenge everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian America: the Vanishing Act. Now here's where our story takes a dark turn. Remember that beautiful lake city of Xaltocan I mentioned? Well, it turns out this place holds one of the most chilling genetic mysteries in Mesoamerican history. Before the Aztecs came to power, Xaltocan was the thriving capital of the Ottomy people. These weren't just some small village dwellers. We're talking about a sophisticated civilization with their own language, culture, and political system. They had been living in the Valley of Mexico for centuries, minding their own business, when the Aztecs showed up with big plans for expansion. What happened next has puzzled historians for generations. One day, the Ottomy people were there, living their lives, trading, building, creating art. Then, seemingly overnight, they vanished from the historical record. Poof. Gone. Just like that. For years, researchers had two main theories about what happened to these missing people. Theory number one, they peacefully assimilated with the Aztecs, intermarried, and became part of the growing empire. Theory number two, they packed up their belongings and moved away to avoid conflict, settling somewhere else in Mexico. Both theories sounded reasonable enough. After all, when powerful empires expand, smaller groups often have to make tough choices about their future. But when scientists started analyzing DNA from Xaltocan, they uncovered evidence that suggests the reality was far more sinister. The genetic data revealed something that sent chills down researchers' spines. The DNA samples from before the Aztec conquest showed one clear genetic signature, the typical markers you'd expect from the Ottomy population. But samples from after the conquest told a completely different story. The original Ottomy genetic markers had virtually disappeared. In their place, researchers found DNA signatures that matched populations from hundreds of miles away. It was as if the entire original population had been replaced by completely different people. This wasn't gradual change through intermarriage or cultural assimilation. This was wholesale population replacement. The implications are staggering and deeply unsettling. The genetic battlefield. Let me paint you a picture of what these DNA findings really mean. Imagine if aliens came to your hometown tomorrow, and within a few years, genetic tests showed that everyone living there had completely different ancestry than the original inhabitants. That's essentially what the evidence suggests happened in Xaltocan and potentially dozens of other pre-Aztec cities. The University of Texas researchers who led this groundbreaking study didn't mince words about their findings. They discovered that the Aztec conquest didn't just change political boundaries or cultural practices, it fundamentally altered the genetic landscape of central Mexico in ways that were previously unimaginable. But here's what makes this discovery even more disturbing. This pattern of genetic replacement wasn't limited to just one city. As more ancient DNA samples were analyzed from sites across the former Aztec Empire, similar patterns began to emerge. Original populations with distinct genetic signatures were systematically replaced by people with different ancestral backgrounds. The scale of this genetic transformation suggests something that goes way beyond normal conquest and assimilation. We're talking about what researchers are now calling demographic replacement, a fancy scientific term for what might have been one of the largest population displacements in pre-Columbian American history. Think about the logistics of this for a moment. To completely replace the genetic signature of an entire region requires moving massive numbers of people over vast distances. The Aztecs weren't just conquering territory and ruling over existing populations, they were actively reshaping the demographic makeup of central Mexico. Some researchers have started using terms like genetic colonization to describe what they're seeing in the DNA data. This wasn't just military conquest, this was systematic population replacement on a scale that rivals some of the most dramatic demographic shifts in human history. The more scientists dig into these genetic patterns, the more questions arise about the true nature of Aztec expansion and what it meant for the millions of people who were living in central Mexico before the empire reached its peak. The Great Migration. Mystery. Now let's talk about one of the biggest plot twists in this genetic detective story. Remember how I mentioned that the Aztecs claimed to come from a mythical homeland called Aztlan? Well, DNA evidence is now suggesting that this wasn't just mythology. It might have been the key to understanding one of the largest population movements in pre-Columbian America. Recent genetic studies have identified something that has archaeologists absolutely buzzing with excitement: distinct Y chromosome haplogroups that can be traced across vast distances in the Americas. These genetic markers are like breadcrumbs that ancient populations left behind as they moved across the landscape. What researchers discovered is that the genetic diversity among Aztec descendants is absolutely enormous, way more diverse than you'd expect from a single founding population. We're talking about haplogroups labeled QMEH2, QM3, QZ768, QL663, QZ780, and QPV3. These aren't just random letters and numbers, they're genetic signatures that tell the story of multiple waves of migration and population mixing on a truly massive scale. The implications are staggering. This genetic diversity suggests that what we call the Aztecs weren't actually a single people at all. Instead, they appear to have been a complex coalition of different groups with varying genetic backgrounds, who came together to form what became the Aztec Empire. But here's where things get really interesting, and more than a little disturbing. The genetic evidence suggests that these different groups didn't come together through peaceful alliance or gradual cultural mixing. Instead, The DNA patterns indicate rapid, large-scale population movements that coincided with the disappearance of original inhabitants from sites across central Mexico. Some geneticists are now theorizing that the Aztec expansion involved organized population transfers on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Imagine coordinating the movement of hundreds of thousands of people across hundreds of miles of challenging terrain. The logistical complexity alone would have required a level of organization and planning that rivals modern military operations. The dark side of empire. Here's where our story takes its darkest turn yet. As more DNA evidence has come to light, researchers have started piecing together what might be one of the most systematic campaigns of population displacement in pre-Columbian American history. The genetic data doesn't just show that original populations disappeared. It shows exactly what replaced them. And the pattern is chillingly consistent across multiple sites. Original inhabitants with distinct local genetic signatures were replaced by people carrying genetic markers from the Aztec heartland and allied regions. This wasn't random migration or gradual demographic change. The genetic evidence suggests a coordinated effort to reshape the population structure of conquered territories. Some researchers are now using terms like genetic imperialism to describe what they're seeing in the DNA data. But what happened to all those original inhabitants? The genetic evidence suggests several possibilities, none of them particularly comforting. Some populations may have been forcibly relocated to distant regions of the empire. Others might have been absorbed into the Aztec military and administrative system, scattered across the empire to prevent local resistance. However, there's a third possibility that researchers are reluctant to discuss openly, but that the genetic evidence increasingly supports: systematic elimination of local populations. The complete disappearance of certain genetic lineages from specific regions suggests demographic catastrophes that go far beyond what you'd expect from normal conquest and assimilation. Recent studies of Y chromosome diversity in Aztec descendant populations have revealed something particularly disturbing. Certain genetic lineages that should be present based on pre-conquest populations are completely missing from modern descendants. It's as if entire family lines simply vanished from the genetic record. This pattern of missing genetic lineages isn't random. It's concentrated in regions that were key targets of Aztec expansion. The implications are deeply unsettling and suggest that the Aztec Empire's rise to power came at a human cost that historians are only now beginning to understand. The genetic evidence speaks. Let's dive deeper into what the actual DNA is telling us, because the scientific details make this story even more incredible and disturbing. When researchers analyze ancient DNA, they're looking for specific genetic markers that can tell them about population relationships, migration patterns, and demographic changes over time. In the case of the Aztec studies, they've been focusing on two main types of genetic material: mitochondrial DNA, which tracks maternal lineages, and Y chromosome DNA, which tracks paternal lineages. The mitochondrial DNA from Tlatelolco revealed something that left scientists stunned. The genetic signatures showed clear connections to populations from much farther north than previously expected. We're talking about genetic markers that link Aztec populations to groups that lived hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away, in what is now the southwestern United States. This discovery has completely revolutionized our understanding of pre-Columbian population movements. The genetic evidence suggests that the ancestors of the Aztecs undertook migrations of truly epic proportions, journeys that would have taken generations to complete and required crossing some of the most challenging terrain in North America. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. The genetic data shows that these migrations weren't gradual, peaceful movements of small groups over long periods. Instead, the DNA patterns suggest rapid, large-scale population movements that happened over relatively short time frames. Y chromosome analysis has revealed even more shocking details. The paternal genetic diversity in Aztec descendant populations is so enormous that it can only be explained by the incorporation of multiple distinct population groups over a very short period. This isn't the genetic signature of a single conquering people. It's the signature of a massive demographic reorganization. Some of the most recent genetic studies have identified specific haplogroups that appear to have been introduced to central Mexico during the height of Aztec expansion. These genetic markers weren't present in pre-Aztec populations, but suddenly appear in large numbers during the imperial period. The timing and distribution of these genetic changes paint a picture of systematic population management on a scale that rivals anything seen in recorded history. The Aztecs weren't just building an empire, they were engineering the genetic landscape of Mesoamerica, rewriting history. The implications of these DNA discoveries go far beyond just updating textbooks. We're talking about fundamentally rethinking one of the most important civilizations in human history. For generations, the Aztec Empire has been portrayed as a relatively straightforward story of military conquest and cultural assimilation. The traditional narrative goes something like this: a skilled warrior, people expanded their territory, conquered their neighbors, and created a tribute-based empire that lasted until the Spanish arrival. But the genetic evidence is forcing historians to confront a much more complex and troubling reality. The DNA doesn't support the idea of peaceful assimilation or gradual cultural mixing. Instead, it suggests systematic demographic engineering on a massive scale. Think about what this means for our understanding of pre-Columbian America. We've always known that the Aztecs were efficient conquerors, but the genetic evidence suggests they were also masters of population control and demographic manipulation. They weren't just building an empire, they were reshaping the human landscape of central Mexico. This revelation has sparked intense debates among researchers. Some argue that the genetic evidence proves the Aztecs were even more sophisticated than previously believed, capable of organizing and executing population transfers that required incredible logistical planning and administrative capability. Others see the DNA findings as evidence of a much darker legacy: the systematic replacement of local populations with people carrying Aztec-allied genetic markers suggests a level of demographic control that raises troubling questions about the empire's methods and motivations. Recent studies have also begun to examine how these population changes affected cultural and linguistic diversity in pre-Columbian Mexico. The genetic replacement seems to have coincided with the disappearance of local languages, artistic traditions, and religious practices. Entire cultural legacies appear to have vanished along with their genetic signatures. The University of Texas researchers who first identified these patterns have called for a complete reevaluation of Aztec imperial policy. Their findings suggest that what we've been calling conquest might be better described as demographic colonization, a systematic effort to replace local populations with people loyal to the Aztec system. The broader implications. Now let's zoom out and think about what these discoveries mean for our understanding of human civilization more broadly. The genetic evidence from Aztec sites isn't just changing our view of one empire, it's forcing us to reconsider how powerful states have managed populations throughout history. The scale and systematic nature of the population changes revealed by DNA analysis suggests that the Aztecs developed techniques for demographic control that were remarkably sophisticated. We're talking about the ability to coordinate the movement and placement of hundreds of thousands of people across vast territories, a logistical achievement that rivals anything attempted by modern governments. But there's a darker side to this sophistication. The genetic evidence suggests that the Aztecs may have been pioneers in what we would now recognize as ethnic cleansing and forced population transfer. The complete disappearance of certain genetic lineages from conquered territories implies demographic policies that went far beyond traditional conquest and tribute collection. Recent archaeological evidence has begun to support what the genetic data has been telling us. Excavations at former Aztec sites have revealed patterns of rapid cultural change that align perfectly with the genetic evidence of population replacement. New architectural styles, pottery types, and burial practices appear suddenly in the archaeological record, suggesting the arrival of entirely new populations rather than gradual cultural evolution. Some researchers have started drawing comparisons between Aztec demographic policies and similar practices in other ancient empires. The Assyrians, for example, were famous for their policy of forcibly relocating conquered populations to prevent rebellion. The genetic evidence suggests the Aztecs may have perfected similar techniques centuries before European contact. The implications extend beyond just ancient history. Understanding how the Aztecs managed population diversity and territorial control provides insights that are relevant to modern discussions about migration, cultural assimilation, and state power. The DNA evidence shows us what demographic engineering looks like in the genetic record, and it's not pretty. These findings are also raising new questions about the Spanish conquest of Mexico. If the Aztecs had already systematically displaced and replaced local populations across their empire, it might explain why Spanish conquistadors encountered less local resistance than they expected in some regions. Areas that had recently undergone population replacement might have lacked the deep cultural and genetic ties to specific territories that usually fuel resistance movements. The scientific revolution. The techniques that scientists are using to uncover these genetic secrets represent a revolution in how we study ancient civilizations. Ancient DNA analysis has become so sophisticated that researchers can now track population movements, identify family relationships, and even determine dietary practices from bone fragments that are hundreds or thousands of years old. The breakthrough that made the Aztec discoveries possible came from advances in extracting and analyzing degraded genetic material. DNA deteriorates rapidly after death, especially in tropical climates like central Mexico. For decades, scientists struggled to get usable genetic information from Mesoamerican archaeological sites. But new techniques for cleaning and amplifying ancient DNA have opened up possibilities that seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. Researchers can now extract genetic information from bone fragments so small and degraded that previous generations of scientists would have dismissed them as useless. The Tlatelolco study that revealed the first evidence of Aztec population replacement used cutting-edge techniques to analyze mitochondrial DNA from burial sites that had been excavated decades earlier. Bone fragments that had been sitting in storage rooms suddenly became treasure troves of genetic information. Y chromosome analysis has provided even more dramatic insights. Unlike mitochondrial DNA, which only tracks maternal lineages, Y chromosome data can reveal patterns of male migration and population structure. The results from Aztec sites have been so surprising that some researchers initially questioned whether the genetic signatures they were seeing could be real. The enormous diversity of Y chromosome haplogroups in Aztec descendant populations was completely unexpected. Traditional models of population growth and expansion predicted much less genetic diversity. The actual data suggests demographic processes that were far more complex and dramatic than anyone had imagined. Recent advances in ancient DNA analysis have also made it possible to extract genetic information from unexpected sources. Hair fragments, tooth enamel, and even soil samples from archaeological sites can now provide genetic information about ancient populations. These new sources of DNA are filling in gaps in our understanding and revealing population changes that were previously invisible. The combination of improved extraction techniques and more powerful analytical methods means that genetic studies of ancient populations are just getting started. Every new batch of DNA results seems to reveal more surprises about the complexity of pre-Columbian demographic patterns. What the experts are saying. The scientific community's reaction to these DNA discoveries has been a mixture of excitement and concern. The genetic evidence is so clear and dramatic that it's impossible to ignore. But the implications are challenging some fundamental assumptions about how ancient civilizations developed and expanded. Dr. Deborah Bolnick, one of the lead researchers on the University of Texas studies, has been careful to emphasize that the genetic evidence needs to be interpreted alongside archaeological and historical data. But she's also been clear that the DNA findings are forcing a complete re-evaluation of Aztec imperial policies and their impact on local populations. The genetic evidence has been so convincing that even researchers who were initially skeptical have begun to accept that something unprecedented happened during Aztec expansion. The scale and systematic nature of the population changes revealed by DNA analysis go far beyond what traditional archaeological methods had suggested. International experts in ancient DNA analysis have praised the technical quality of the Mesoamerican studies while expressing concern about the historical implications. The genetic patterns revealed at Aztec sites are unlike anything seen in other ancient civilizations, suggesting that the Aztecs developed unique approaches to population management and territorial control. Some researchers have begun calling for expanded genetic studies of other Mesoamerican civilizations to determine whether systematic population replacement was a widespread practice or unique to the Aztecs. Preliminary DNA analysis from Maya sites has revealed some similar patterns, but the evidence is still being evaluated. The findings have also sparked interest from researchers studying other ancient empires. Genetic studies of Roman, Chinese, and Persian imperial sites are being planned to determine whether systematic population replacement was a common feature of ancient state formation or something unique to the Americas. Critics have argued that the genetic evidence might be misleading because ancient DNA preservation is uneven and potentially biased towards certain population groups. However, the consistency of the findings across multiple sites and different types of genetic markers has convinced most experts that the population changes were real and systematic. The debate has moved beyond whether the genetic changes happen to focus on what they mean for our understanding of ancient American civilizations and their methods of expansion and control. The mysteries that remain. Even with all these groundbreaking discoveries, huge questions remain about the Aztec Empire and its impact on the populations of central Mexico. The genetic evidence has revealed the scope and scale of demographic changes, but many of the specific mechanisms and motivations remain mysterious. One of the biggest unanswered questions involves the fate of displaced populations. The genetic evidence clearly shows that original inhabitants of conquered territories disappeared from the local gene pool. But where did they go? Some may have been relocated to other parts of the empire, but genetic surveys of potential destination regions haven't yet revealed clear evidence of these displaced populations. Another mystery involves the logistics of population replacement. Moving hundreds of thousands of people across hundreds of miles of challenging terrain would have required incredible organizational capability and resources. The Aztecs would have needed to provide food, water, shelter, and protection for massive population movements. How they accomplished this without leaving more obvious traces in the archaeological record remains unclear. The genetic evidence also raises questions about resistance and collaboration. Did local populations cooperate with population transfer policies, or were they forced to comply? The DNA data can tell us about demographic outcomes, but it can't reveal the human stories behind these massive population changes. Researchers are also puzzled by the speed of the genetic changes revealed by DNA analysis. Population replacement on the scale suggested by the genetic evidence would normally be expected to take generations to complete. But the DNA patterns suggest that dramatic demographic changes happened over periods of just a few decades. Some scientists have speculated that the Aztecs might have used systematic intermarriage policies to accelerate genetic mixing and cultural assimilation. But this theory doesn't explain the complete disappearance of certain genetic lineages from specific regions. The relationship between genetic change and cultural transformation remains another area of active research. The genetic evidence shows dramatic population replacement, but how this related to changes in language, religion, art, and daily life practices is still being investigated. Recent studies have begun to examine whether the population changes revealed by genetic analysis were unique to the Aztec period or part of longer-term demographic trends in Mesoamerica. Preliminary evidence suggests that systematic population replacement may have been a recurring feature of political expansion in pre-Columbian Mexico, but more research is needed to confirm this pattern. The future of genetic archaeology. The techniques that revealed these shocking truths about Aztec population replacement are just the beginning of a genetic revolution that's going to transform our understanding of ancient civilizations around the world. Scientists are now developing even more powerful methods for extracting and analyzing ancient DNA that will make today's discoveries look primitive by comparison. New techniques for reading genetic information from environmental samples mean that researchers may soon be able to track population changes without needing human remains at all. Imagine being able to analyze soil samples from ancient settlement sites and determine not just who lived there, but when population changes occurred, where new inhabitants came from, and even what they ate. These advances are moving from the realm of science fiction into actual research laboratories. The success of the Aztec genetic studies has inspired similar projects focused on other ancient American civilizations. Major research initiatives are now underway to analyze DNA from Maya, Inca, and Mississippian sites. Early results suggest that systematic population replacement may have been a widespread feature of ancient American state formation, not something unique to the Aztecs. But perhaps the most exciting development involves the integration of genetic data with other cutting-edge archaeological techniques. Researchers are now combining ancient DNA analysis with isotope studies that can track ancient diets and migration patterns, creating incredibly detailed pictures of how ancient populations lived, moved, and interacted. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are also being applied to genetic data in ways that are revealing patterns that human researchers might have missed. Computer algorithms can analyze thousands of genetic samples simultaneously, identifying population relationships and migration patterns that would take human researchers years to discover. The global implications of these advances are staggering. Similar genetic studies are being planned for ancient sites in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. We're on the verge of being able to track human population movements across the entire planet over thousands of years of history. These future studies may reveal that the kind of systematic population replacement discovered in Aztec territories was actually a common feature of ancient imperial expansion worldwide. Or they might show that the Aztecs developed unique approaches to demographic control that set them apart from other ancient civilizations. The technology is also becoming more accessible and affordable, which means that genetic studies of ancient populations are likely to expand rapidly over the next decade. University laboratories around the world are acquiring the equipment needed for ancient DNA analysis, and international collaborations are making genetic research possible at sites that were previously too remote or politically sensitive to study. The future of genetic archaeology promises to reveal human stories that have been hidden for millennia, giving voice to populations and cultures that left no written records but whose genetic signatures continue to influence modern populations around the world. Outro. Recent discoveries in Aztec DNA reveal a hidden history of large-scale population replacement, showing that the empire's power was built not only on military conquest, but also on deliberate demographic engineering. Genetic evidence uncovers vanished groups like the Ottomy of Zaltacan and highlights the diverse ancestry of modern descendants. painting a picture of cultural upheaval and human loss that archaeology alone had not captured. These findings underscore how genetic research is reshaping our understanding of ancient civilizations, exposing the profound human cost behind the rise of empires. What do you think about these shocking DNA discoveries? Do they change how you view the Aztec Empire and its legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what aspect of this genetic detective story surprised you the most.